I'm your host, Sal Guarda. With me, as always, is former defensive lineman Kyle Searle, Hall of Fame cornerback Kurt Hess, and former director of football operations Dan Kopp. Please, as always, subscribe, follow us on YouTube Live. Please give us a like, a comment, and follow us on Instagram, Whitetown Penguin Podcast. All that being said, again, we are 22 days away from kickoff. Sounds too crazy to be true, but it is. We will be in Villanova soon on a Thursday night. But prior to that, we still need to go over a few things. And tonight, we're going to go over our predictions on the 2024 season. As always, take this with a grain of salt. And yes, we are allowed to change our minds as the season progresses. This is purely based on last year, the offseason, different changes, and what we kind of foresee. To kind of really break it down, the format of tonight's show, we're going to just kind of break down month by month by month and then give you our opinions at the end. That being said, real quick, just the layout for the audience to know, there's 12 games this year. I'm just going to read them off so everyone has it. We are at Villanova, host Valparaiso, host Duquesne, at Pitt. Then conference starts at Missouri State, Indiana State at home, at South Dakota State. Then South Dakota and North Dakota are both at home, at Illinois State, at Southern Illinois, and Northern Iowa comes to the Ice Castle to finish the season. And then we have a bye week before playoffs start. Dodge, North Dakota State, and Murray State this year. Weirdly dodge North Dakota State again. But quick question before we dive into it, going around the horn. Again, there's 12 games to play this year. We have learned that you can lose 4 and get into the playoffs. So that being said, under, over, are we going to lose 4.5 games, more or less? What do you guys think?
I think this is a really, really tough schedule for us this year. Not only 12 games, but bye week at the end. Really quickly, I that is a perfect line right there at 4.5. My hope is that we are under. I'm going to say over. We're at 5 losses.
I'm going to say under. I got us under that 4.5.
I currently have us over the 4.5 losses there.
You have us at 5 or more?
Yeah.
This is coming from Searle. I think he had us running the table at this podcast last year or something.
I did. I had them 9-2 last year.
I think you had us. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Well, let's transition. Let's get into the September games. Again, September games at Villanova, Valparaiso, Duquesne, Pitt, and Missouri State. Dan, break us down.
Yes, Sal, you want to talk about game of that month that stuck out to us. For me, that month, everyone probably thinks it's 1 or 2 of those games, but I'm going to say at Missouri State. That game to me really jumps out for September because obviously including the August game, but it's the first Road Valley Conference game. You've got to win on the road when you can. I think this is a game we'll can win, of course. That's, you guys all remember, it's never an easy trip. I don't care or know what they've done to that stadium, but it's not an easy trip. It's not an easy place to play. And, I don't see us putting all of our chips in week 1. I mean, it's a huge game. It's a rematch game, so to speak. But I kind of look at what the FBS has done to be like us at the FCS, that, whether we win or lose at Villanova, if we're 3-1 after 4 games or whatever it might be, we still got to go to Missouri State and win. We can't be 3-1 and lose momentum, or if we're 2-2, we've got to go out there and win. So that game, really, the early part of the year, in my mind, is as big as a game, to that point in the season. So Missouri State's that one that really jumps out at me in September. I think we would agree that we're going to take care of business at home in September. We should really put it on Valpo and Duquesne. call it the way it is. And, Villanova is going to be a hell of a game. Everybody knows that. And Pitt's going to be interesting. Pitt, I don't know what quarterback situation they're in. I think they have a bye week before us, but their early season, they play West Virginia, North Carolina, Cincinnati, all before they play us. So that game, you never know. But Missouri State, to make a long story short, Missouri State is the one that jumps out to me for September.
One thing I just realized, and we're going to have to do more research on this, it could be a huge issue for Penguin Nation. I'm speaking of the fans. As you guys know, Missouri Valley Football Conference has a TV contract with ESPN. All games are on ESPN Plus. CAA has a contract with Flow Sports that all their athletics are played. Just looking at this script that I sent y'all, it's a schedule. We're playing Villanova on the Flow Network. I hope that not means there's a paywall for us to watch the game that night. I don't know if we're going to have to ask Trevor Parks or what we're going to do, but locally it may not be an issue, but nationally for like Kurt and I, it may be an issue. And then I just see just talking that week, I see the Pitt game is on the ACC Extra Network. For those who know, I watch a lot of ACC football. That's just a translation of your local CW network is what that Pitt game will be on. Your just local TV network. But appreciate it, Dan. Let's get into October. Indiana State at South Dakota State. Then South Dakota and North Dakota come here. Big month for them Dakota boys. Curdy.
Yeah, October in my eyes is probably the do or die, just because November is looming, and November in our schedule, if you look at it in totality, in my opinion, November is that do or die month. But you also want to be in that position, and I know Cyril's going to talk about it. You want to put yourself in that position, and if you don't handle your business in October, then November could be meaningless in some ways. South Dakota State, traveling at South Dakota State. Obviously, everybody wants to highlight that one, the two-time national champs. But the game that I really think is the do or die for us is that South Dakota game. Just because I think we proved it to ourselves last year for 3 quarters of football that we were better than South Dakota at South Dakota. But they probably are thinking, we're way better than this team. We beat them last year at home, and we definitely owe them a game. And that's going to be one that we have to defend home field, defend the Ice Castle late in October to really put ourselves in a position to be competitive for the rest of the season, because those last 3 games in November are tough. I would highlight and circle that South Dakota Coyotes game at home. But followed by them is North Dakota. So that 2-week stretch right there after playing South Dakota State is really going to determine if we have ourselves in a chance to go to the playoffs, or if we've potentially gone 0-3 in those games and maybe played ourselves out of playoff contention. So October is definitely very meaningful for us this year, so that those games in November are purposeful.
Appreciate it, Curdy. And on to what I think, my personal opinion, is the biggest month of the year. I'm going to let Cyril give us his 2 cents as we are at Illinois State, at Southern Illinois, and then we host Northern Iowa.
Yeah, so no surprise here. November, tail end of the season here, always seems to be a gauntlet for the Penguins. No favors with scheduling. I think the worst part about November is you see that bye week at the very end. Usually that's sticking somewhere in the middle of your season to rest up and get some guys back from injuries, nicks and bruises, whatever the case may be. The fact that that's at the end of the season is pretty atrocious. That's what pretty much sets this schedule up to be one of the worst that I've seen for the Penguins since we started playing. Kurt touched on October is going to be a task, and it's tough to pick one game to highlight for November, because like Kurt said, it could be do or die every single week depending on how the guys play throughout October. I'm just gonna, pick Southern Hill. That was a good playoff team last year, and Youngstown State took them to the woodshed, and they're going to want some revenge. They have some guys returning on that team. They're trying to get back into the postseason, make another deep run. So definitely circle that Southern Hill game, and obviously I always got to highlight the Northern Iowa game. We get them at home, and it doesn't matter if Northern Iowa is having a bad season or a good season. Just whatever the case may be, they know regardless of what their record is that they can beat the Penguins, and they believe that. So to finish the season with Northern Iowa is going to be an interesting leap into the next season, depending on if we get into the playoffs or not. How are we going to end conference play? And so we, fortunately or unfortunately, have to do against Northern Iowa this season.
Appreciate it, brother. Let's transition. So that was a breakdown of really the season to come for the listeners to understand the month by month challenges we have. Now that we've kind of put the teasers out there, kind of dive into our predictions. We're going to go around and just to share on the 4.5 under over. I have 4 losses on the season, so I think we are going to lose 4 games or less. So that makes 2 of us at 4 games and less, and 2 of us at 5 losses or more. So break it down. We're one at a time here. We're going to give what we think our final projected records will be, who those losses are. You could put together who the wins are. What are the big games? What are the upset alerts that we're going to win? Which are the ones that we may be upset? And then the final question, which is really the only question that matters at the end of the regular season, are we going to the playoffs? Let's break it down. Go ahead, Curdy.
So my final projection for our record is 7-5. The reason that I think 7-5 is fair for us is, number one, I think that we have lost a lot of talent. That doesn't mean that we can't win and go 8-4 or 9-3. Specifically, Kyle, our senior season, I felt like our junior year we were very talented, and we may have lost some talent. We felt like our senior year we maybe played a little bit better as like complementary football. So I'm not saying that these guys can't get to that 8-win mark. I just think based on the way our schedules lied, we're going to have a month where we don't lose. And I think that that's going to be really challenging for us to do based on the way that things are lined up. So, for example, Villanova and Pitt, if you mark those as losses and Villanova can go either way, we already have a month where we have 2 losses. Bring out the next month, you got kind of another pre-gauntlet where you have the best team coming in. You chalk that up as a loss, and then South Dakota, North Dakota, one of those could be a loss. And then with November, the way Cyril just talked about it, you're talking about beating at Illinois State, at Southern Illinois, and Northern Iowa at home. Can you go unscathed in November? I think we can do it. I think it's going to be very challenging. Something that's going to work against us possibly this year in the playoff scheme is that last week of FCS football, we're off. So Northern Iowa at home may be our last chance to show that playoff committee what we look like. We don't have that extra Murray State like we had last year. So 7-5, I think, is a pretty fair thing. And it's going to come down to one game, whether we get in or not.
I guess that's fair. So you don't exactly, you broke it down pretty well. You didn't exactly pick the losses, but you basically said that's where they're at.
Yeah. I gave you 3. Villanova, Pitt, and South Dakota State. We'll lose to one of the I have us projected to lose one of the Dakota games at the end of October, whether that's South Dakota or North Dakota. And then I would probably call it at Southern Hill would be a 5th loss.
Yeah. If lines existed, there's 8 games on this schedule that we would be a 1 touchdown favorite or underdog easy, so I get that. DK, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I've got us at 8-4, and even if I'm kind of like Kurt. I'm not going to really go through. I'm not making certain predictions. The 8-4, I think, kind of could go a certain way. Like Kurt said, let's say we come out of go into October and we're 3-2. I mean, that's why to me the Missouri State game is so big. If we lose to Villanova in week 1, which is going to be a heck of a challenge because we did lose some talent and it's at their place and we've got guys playing maybe some of their getting their first start. But if we do lose it, and I'm not saying we are, it could go either way, but if we do and we lose to Pitt and we're 2-2, okay. So, maybe people thought that anyways. So going to Missouri State, just in my opinion, really might be the game of the year at that point. Because now we're 3-2 and we've got to figure out a way with 7 games to go, to win 5 of them. And it can be done. I think that's why those, and Kurt brought it up earlier, the back-to-back games of, I think it's USD first, right? South Dakota, then North Dakota at home. We got to win both of those games. You've got to win at home. I think you guys, we always talked about it back in the day. And I heard Coach Phillips talk about it. We have got in a grind like this schedule, we have got to basically go undefeated at home almost, right? So that to me, 8-4, whatever we come out after Pitt, if it's 2-2, we're still okay. I would be a little concerned if we go to Villanova and we get roped by, and I don't expect that to happen, but if we do, but still it's one game, right? I mean, we're not knocked out of the playoffs if we start out 0-1, and we're not guaranteed the playoffs if we start out 1-0. So I'm just really kind of looking at Missouri State as I could probably spin my prediction real quick, but I got us going 8-4 to make another long story short.
Would you say we're making the playoffs?
Do I think we make the playoffs? Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I do. At 8-4, if we don't make the playoffs, we're all going to be, I don't know what we'll have. Kyle will probably drive to the committee or something like that and be taking one of them.
Yeah, it'd be 2013 Penguins all over again. When
hey, is that Missouri State game? Is that considered a money game?
Money game.
No, I mean going on the road to play an FBS school,
Well, yeah. I think we're paying them. That's the money game. We're paying them. Yeah,
that's going to be their first conference game since they announced they're moving to FBS. I think the entire conference is going to be rooting for us to just completely kick their ass. But anyway,
well, here's a good point. Back in the day, they always said YSU can't move up because the stadium's not big enough. No good. Well, now put the blimp up and show Missouri State Stadium, and so whatever. Yeah.
Cyril, what are your thoughts, man? 5 losses.
So before everyone flips a lid at me, I understand that Youngstown State football has always been next man up mentality since Kurt and I were there. Next man up, talent leaves, got to replace it. Injuries happen. Gotta get in there and play the game still. And I understand that these games are not won or lost or played on paper, but it's still an extremely difficult schedule. And I think we are taking the fact that the bye week is really non-existent in the schedule too lightly, and especially for the level of talent in this conference. And right now I have them sitting at 6-6. I think this is a 500 football team, and I hope to God that I'm wrong. Would love nothing more than to be wrong on this and to eat my words. South Dakota State is returning that quarterback who I think is pretty good. Sal says he stinks. I think he's pretty good, and they're returning 15 additional starters with him. They have some confidence. They have some postseason experience. They want to build on that, and they want to make a name for themselves with the rest of the Dakota schools. Ill State, I have a loss. I have a loss at Southern Ill, road games. We've just traditionally struggled on the road. I don't know why, what it is. We talk about it all the time. It's tough to win on the road. It's tough to play on the road in this conference. So those are two games at the end of the schedule in November where we relatively have no break, and they're good teams. So I have those two as a loss. I do have us beating Northern Iowa to win and kind of salvage the season for the seniors. Let me see. I think the Villanova game, I think we're going to start with a loss. The returning the quarterback, I think he's a sixth-year senior. Those boys have confidence. And like I said in an earlier show, a few shows ago, you know, if we're trying to get on Villanova's level, then we're going to be too far behind because they're going to be trying to get on South Dakota State's level. So unfortunately, I just think that the loss of talent, the inexperienced QB, and Brungard, he can ball. And I'm not saying he's starting, but I've seen him, he can ball. But there's a difference in balling for a series and balling for a season. And we got to be consistent. We got to eliminate errors. There was a lot of penalties last season, a lot of stupid penalties. So I just think that this schedule is set up for a letdown, and I hope that we can salvage something. I hope we're 7-5, 8-4. Would love nothing more than to be one of those records. But I think if we can beat Northern Iowa at home and build off some success going into next season, I'm not saying we're playing for next season, but reality is we have no bye week, and if we get an injury, we might be toast.
And as I said at the beginning of the show, we are allowed to change our mind once we see the product on the field and the product on the field of the other teams. I remember this time last year, South Dakota was a complete joke, and then they end up the number 3 seed in the playoffs once we saw the product on the field. So understood. I'm gonna run through mine real quick, and it's when I say real quick, it's not real quick. So you can interrupt me, step in if you guys have anything to argue about. A lot of hot takes in my preview. I'm going to start off with the hottest take, and tell me if you disagree. Looking at this schedule, I think Villanova is the best team on the schedule. I think that is going to be our biggest loss of the year. I have us going 8-4, and I have us. Joe kind of touched on it. A lot of question marks, a lot of new faces, new coordinator. We're going to need some time to figure it out, and at Villanova is not the best time to figure it out. I think things are going to get really ugly at Villanova. Valpo and Duquesne are great games to figure out who we are, get some guys on the field, get the systems in place. And I don't know how much – I know you guys don't watch ACC football, but Pittsburgh is horrendous, and they didn't get any better. They're terrible. If we go in there, definitely bet us on whatever the spread is. We go in there and win. Don't be surprised, and it doesn't mean that we're a great team. Pittsburgh's terrible, guys. They really are. And then to Dan's point, that Missouri State is going to be huge to kind of kick off who we are. That's the first team we kind of play. And I don't say on our level, but in our conference where it matters. And then going into October at South Dakota State, that's going through my losses. Villanova, I have us losing the Pitt close. At South Dakota State, I have it as a loss, but it's going to be closer than you think. A lot of their big boys left. They're not as good as last year, but they do reload there. I do think they will beat us. And then I was just seeing in South Dakota's praises. I think they stink. I think last year was a fluke. They suck. I think South Dakota and North Dakota are going to take a real beat down at the Ice Castle. And then this is being the biggest month of the year in November. In my opinion, those are the 3 biggest toss-up games. I mean, outside of North Dakota State and South Dakota State, the next tier of the playoff bubble, if you will, in the conference is Illinois State, Southern Illinois, Northern Iowa, and Youngstown State. Who of those 4 teams is going to emerge? and we play 3 of them in that last month of November. If we win 2 of the 3 games in November, we're going to the playoffs. If we only win 1 game in November, we're done. I actually have us losing on the road at Illinois State. I think that's a sneaky game that we never talk about. And it was really close to the Ice Castle this past year. Going to their place, I think it'll be really close, but I don't think we can go there and win. However, Southern Ill, I do think we rebound Southern Ill, and to Stroh's point, I think we do beat Northern Iowa. It's always a tight game, and home field means all the difference in that game. Again, we're losing to Villanova, Pitt, Jackrabbits, and Illinois State, but I think getting the last 2 wins of the season and hitting that Northern Iowa, in case there's any critics on the fence, winning that game will definitely put us over the fence. The bye week at the end, I don't know if that will be to our favor or not, being able to play as the committee is meeting. Could be. There could be some bubble teams that lose that weekend that could give us the edge, and we can't lose and we're not playing. I have us going to the playoffs. I think it'll be very similar to last year where we host some terrible team that really shouldn't be there, and then we have to go on the road to play somebody really good. How we fare, I don't know. It depends. Is it going to be a Villanova team, or is it a team that's a little bit more manageable that we could catch some steam and have really the I don't say like 2016, where really the puzzle pieces stepped in. We had a really easy road to get to Frisco that year, which that's all it takes. Could have happened this year? It could. But I do have us going to the playoffs at 8-4. I don't know if you guys have any feedback on all those takes.
Yeah, none of us watch any ACC football.
You're missing out, man.
Are they still a conference, or did Florida State and Clemson lose?
Two cents on that. What's so funny is that they talk about every month on how they figured out a way to leave, yet they haven't done it. So they're all talk. Anyway, is that it for any last cents on predictions?
I kind of wanted to go ahead, Kurt. Go ahead.
I like Coach Kopp, man, on that Missouri State. That one, that's going to be an early. How many times are people like, "Oh, this is a must-win game," and it's like week 4 in college football. I mean, that's what, week 5. That's you got to get past that one, and on the road. I remember going there. We went there once, right? I mean, that's a tough trip, right?
Oh yeah, Plaster Stadium or something.
I was 0-4 against Missouri State during my tenure.
And Cody Kirby was a dog, man.
Yeah,
Kirby.
I remember him. Yep. Yeah, Sal, I like what you had there, other than you're saying that South Dakota sucks. I thought Kyle was gonna fall out of his chair when you said that, but he hunts out there, man. He hunts out there. Nothing sucks out there unless you don't.
I'll be doing a show from South Dakota this season.
Yeah, and I kind of look at you guys. We all touched on it, and I'm not sure who said, not that we're downplaying. I think Kyle said it about the no bye week, so 12 straight weeks. So I think every coach I've known, and you guys that played for and coached with, has always said your 2 most important hires are your strength coach and your trainer. So we're going to kind of find out how good the strength program and the training group is, because there's no bye week. So how healthy can we stay? How strong have we gotten to this point? I don't know how many bodies they're allowed to bring to camp anymore. It used to be like 100, and now it's probably more. And so how are we doing? What is it now, Kyle? Do you know?
I think I was talking to Albie about this. It's like up to 125 or like 130.
Well, that's huge for us. So we're not beating. Yeah, we're not beating on our starters as much. I don't know. So the coaches, the strength staff, the training groups got to do a great job of keeping us healthy. I mean, I think that group might be under the microscope more than the coaching staff. I mean, how strong are we? How healthy can we stay? So, and depth is a factor of that, but I'm with you, Si. I think we make the playoffs, and it's probably going to come down. My prediction had it coming down to you and I, and now they're not going to be in a dome at the end of November. Hopefully it's windy and snowy or rainy, and they got to come outside. And But
A lot of question marks, right? There's so much we don't know about this team, but one thing we do know is we know about Doug Phillips and we know about Kurt's boy Troy. I have faith in Phillips that he's at a point of the program like he's reloaded. It's not like he was hired yesterday. I think he's got boys, and I think that we are going to be pleasantly shocked in a good way of how much talent we actually have ready to go and replace the guys from last season.
Our most experience is on the offensive line. And if you're going to win in this conference, you better have a good offensive line. Sure. And we're three deep at quarterback from what I hear. Bo can play. Brady Shannon, the Youngstown kid who transferred back, he can play. Yeah. And Max Blank from Bethel Park, he's a big old throwing dude. So
and
it's
tailbacks.
Tailbacks. We got Tyshawn King back. We are, we might not have like Mitch coming back with all those starts, but we don't even know who week one starter might be. But at least we're going to go into the season with three quarterbacks who probably could step in and win a game. And I don't know the last time. Thank goodness Kurt stayed healthy for his 4 years of playing. Think about that, with no disrespect to the guys behind you, Kurt, but you stayed so healthy and played, again, strength, credit to, Coach Cochran, Coach Pat, and those guys, and JD and the trainers back in the day. I think that to me is maybe the biggest thing that's going to jump out, that we better be strong and we better be healthy. So
and the jump on that too, and to the strength and training staff, it's our coaching staff. It's like, how do you dial back practice, and how do you tone it down in terms of physicality but keep the intensity? And that's a thing, and people that haven't been in that type of practice environment probably don't understand the difference of it. But there are ways to keep the intensity high but dial back the physicality of practice. And I think with no bye week, that's going to be pretty critical. And timing that, do we do it in the middle of October? Do we do it at the end of October? How do we do this? So that's going to be on our coaches and Coach Phillips. And we believe in Coach Phillips, so we think that he can get that part of it done.
Yeah. Sal said it. This is his fifth year, right? Are we going into fifth year for
2020?
Yeah, it's that year of when it kind of hopefully comes together. We all, love and appreciate what Coach is doing, and I think, it's. But I like maybe the bye at the end of the year. If we go 8-4, guys, we have to be a lock for the playoffs, right? How do we not? How does a Missouri Valley team?
Yes.
I think so. Yeah. I think so.
If we're 8-4, then yes.
Yeah, so if we're 8-4 and we it's like getting them playoffs in the NFL, and you got a bye week before. Those teams love that. That could turn out to be the perfect bye week after 12 straight going to the playoffs. We get a week off. Hopefully it's the perfect bye week.
Good point.
To your guys' point, real quick, Sal, like something Tress said last week was just like, you have to kind of find those guys that still want to be here, transfers, you know what I mean? Like, and there was that winter time after we had lost to Villanova where it was like some of our best, most talented guys were leaving us. But then there was kind of that sense with guys like, Aiden Parker and Tyshawn King and a couple of those other guys like Max Tomczak. It's like, I'm not leaving. This is my spot. You know what I mean? And so maybe, and Sal, to your point, like some of these guys have to show up and see how they respond because they've never played college football before. Maybe Coach Phillips has all those guys that love Youngstown State and wanted to stay here and really bought in. And if you get guys that buy in and don't leave for NIL or leave for transfers, hey, all of a sudden we have, and not 60% of those guys who are bought in, we have 85 or 90%. Maybe this team ceiling is 9 or 10 wins. And we don't know it because we haven't seen it. But like you guys said, that's all on the development of the program. And hopefully that culture is ingrained in the guys who are still here.
Yeah. Well, I was going to comment on Searle's statement about practice. If you guys remember when Haycock, he did a great job managing practice as far as, just for the listeners to understand, when you can tell the team was tired, someone got hurt, he would cross off inside from the practice script. He'd call 7-on-7 early after 6 plays. he would just shorten the practice or find a way when he saw people getting hurt, tired, or just out of it from the exhaustment of the season. And then when we got the Wolf, we had a script, and hell, if you missed one play on that script, we ran that script until it was ran the right way every time. Not saying one was better than the other, but we saw the two extremes. And then Dan, again, you hit the offense. Offense, I have no questions about. Offense, I hope it's going to be awesome. Offense, defense, a lot of question marks. Not saying that there's question marks in a negative way. I just think we don't know the identity of our defense. Did I say defense?
Yeah.
And Villanova is not going to be a fair chance to really see it, because a good defense may get destroyed by Villanova. We won't know until maybe Pitt or Missouri State on the identity of that defense.
Yeah, I mean, Sal, everyone brought up a good point about, I mean, Kurt and Kyle were recruited by one staff, played for the other staff that you both mentioned, Coach Aycock, Coach Wolford. Sal, you and I worked under both of those guys. I think it becomes kind of an art, that mastering, that's, practice, that window of keeping your guys healthy. There were times when Coach Aycock, unfortunately, had no choice. Do you remember how many injuries we had in 2008? By the time we came home from South Dakota State, we had lost Michael Savage and we were just beat to heck. I remember sitting in staff meetings when Wolf said, we're going to do this script, but he said, I got guys like Kyle Searle that will just practice for 3 hours. He don't give a shit. He's going to practice. He will rep after rep after rep. And he knew a guy like Kurt, and there's other guys, you guys are staring at me right now, but Kurt was going to throw, if he had to throw 62 passes in practice, he's going to throw them, so that's a really good point, Sal, you have, because I think in year 5, I'm sure Coach Phillips and his staff have a good, idea of the schedule, and they know they have no bye week, and we're going to find out about their depth. I mean, he's year 5. We know he's doing a good job, and there's probably some guys out there we just don't know about yet, and we're going to find out pretty soon. So
you talk about that season we were beat up with Michael Savage. Remember, we had the punter that he was so beat up that he got injured in the hotel room pulling his sheets off his bed or something. You remember that?
Tito. Yeah, I mean, he was just – we were so beat up. I mean, we had lost – did we lose 2 quarterbacks through the first –
Yeah, that season's why I committed to YSU, because 2 of them quit.
Yeah.
And then B. Stums got hurt. And then it was Konetsky and Dalen Campbell, who were freshman walk-ons at the time. And they were the only 2 on the roster. So I remember Coach Wright's like, we have 2 guys. We need some more. And I'm like,
yeah. Well, I mean, that was, obviously, here's a great example. And I got to shut up here. But, we didn't know, Kurt, what you were going to bring to the table. You were really the only quarterback. Sal and we've told this story and joke about it. Coach Wolford's group came in and said, who's our quarterback? I remember, just like, well, we have this guy, Kurt Hess. I mean, he was recruited by the prior staff. He's a good quarterback, comes from a great program.
But hasn't played.
Hasn't done anything. He's done Ironman workouts for 4 months.
So what would any coach do? They're going to think, that it's a quarterback game. We all know this. They're I got to go find at least 1 or 2 quarterbacks. We had depth at Kyle Searle's position at the time, but so I don't, I think it's great that we're not sitting here going, hey, Mitch graduated and the junior quarterback we thought was going to be the guy left. We're sitting here going, we are literally 3 deep at the quarterback position day 1 of training camp. And that's probably a luxury, but I really, I'm not going to say names of who the strength coach or who the trainer is, because I don't know them that well, but I think the microscope is probably going to be on them as to, come week 5 after we're heading to Missouri State, and hopefully we're undefeated. I don't know, but whatever the hell we are, it's still going to be a big game. So,
well, quick transition. Cyril, you have a very active YouTube chat, actually more active than we had Tressel on. A lot of opinions, questions, statements. You want to share?
Yeah, Quigley comes in, and I agree with him, and I think we've all kind of touched on it. the Nova game, that can really set the tone for the year. You know, if we're a fringe team at the end of the season and we can get a win at Nova, I think that'll get us in. If we're say 7-5 and we have a win against Nova, that could push us in. I think that's a tall task. Crum says, you know, he agrees with Quigley. Pitt's a winnable game, like you said. I think that game is set up to not be favorable for us. Week 4, you know, if Pitt's trying to right the ship, who better to try and right it against than us, right? Like who we'll see what happens. Like I said, the games aren't played on paper. We gotta play the game. Quiggs and Crum, Richard Wolf is in here. He says they're going 10-2. You know, the diehard faithful Richard.
How about what he said about Flow Sports or Flow Football?
$20 a month for Flow Football subscription. So
we better talk to Trevor
like
Parks.
It's like a ticket to a game. Like you just buy the subscription for a month and cancel it. Whatever.
Oh God!
I thought for us, I thought locally, and that's good for me. Maybe I thought they're doing all away games here locally, but also
must be nice, Dan.
They might.
It's like we're going to Cop's house.
Cigars at Cop's house.
No cigar lounges. I belong to so many cigar lounges here in town. We'll watch a quarter one somewhere, quarter two. We'll just rotate around town.
That.
So
cigars.
You know, we gotta when we have our phrase of the season or whatever, or our little catchphrase, you know, we got to make it mean something. And that's what Quigley says, you know, about grit you. Like, we're going to have to grit this season out. Like I said, 12 straight weeks of football. It's going to be great, allegedly, for the fans of having just wall-to-wall football for a whole season and no down week. But that grit is going to come into play there. Also says this is the only Penguin Hockey podcast around, and he loves it.
Who said that? That wasn't said.
Hey, who told you?
It was said.
Oh yeah, it was said. I didn't mention him at all tonight.
Are we doing the show from Blacksburg, Sal?
I'm not going there this year.
What kind of fan are you?
No. Okay. Anyway, real quick before we close up, let me transition. Before we shut things down, we had Tressel on the podcast. Very generously gave us 2 hours of his time. We didn't get a chance to kind of just comment or really talk about it to our listeners. Just a quick recap of y'all's thoughts, opinions. As y'all know, we had about maybe 10 or 12 questions lined up, and he answered each with probably 3 stories and then answered it directly. And every story was sitting on the edge of your seat. He's probably one of the best storytellers I've ever listened to. What were y'all thoughts on that show?
Yeah, I thought it was cool.
I think Sal,
I'd asked him that one question about the linebackers and who he thought were the best linebackers in YSU history, and I thought it was such a Tressel answer, just because he seemingly cared about every single one, and he knew the inside scoop on every single one.
Yes.
And he gave us this linebacker that we probably should have known, you know, being a YSU alum. But you know, that was the guy that he remembers as the guy who was like, yeah, I'll move positions so that Tim Johnson or whatever.
I think Tim Johnson told us about him, didn't he? That's how I knew the name.
And I bet Tim knows him and understands like how influential he probably was for that team and for that roster. But I mean, Tress probably has 20 stories about guys who made unselfish decisions, and that just was a testament to the culture that he built, and that's why he was so successful and built successful teams for us at YSU and OSU. I mean, he's probably got a ton of stories, but I appreciated that because when you go back now 20, 30 years, you look at the record books, you see the tackles, you see the averages per games, you see that, you know, all the records broken in this, but it's like, you know, those guys were just as big a piece of those rosters as anybody written in a record book.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I love that. to just jump on Kurt's point there, how he redirected the question and to the outside linebacker there. You know, I meet with my high school coach fairly regularly, and we talk about, you know, just catch up on the old times and stuff. And he's got a good saying, and I think this is what Tressel was kind of alluding to, is like, how do we determine who the best is, right? Like there's facts, and then there's the truth. And the facts are the statistics, the things that were documented on the field. And then the truth is like how you get to the facts. So is that some guy giving up his position to move to the outside so Tim can play, and forcing tackles inside to Tim, or whatever, or tipping a pass into a cornerback's hands and he gets the interception. But really the truth is that play was caused by someone else's, you know, play on the field. And to Sal's point, you know, anytime he would answer a question and he would give these stories, it's like he was texting us on the side. He's like, well, now I have so many follow-up questions about this. Like, I want to just, you know, ask him about, you know, this, what, like, why, the one Sal had is like, why were we told to leave the Ohio Valley Conference? Right.
Yeah.
Like, what's the back?
That?
He's like, yeah, we were told to leave, but like, you know, so I honestly, like, if we could have had just an entire football game to just sit and talk with Tressel, I'm sure we would still walk away with more questions wanting to be answered.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, how cool was it that we had him on for 2 hours? You know, I mean, I think he was gracious, like you said, Sal, to do that. And I hope we get Coach Haycock and Coach Wolford and Coach Pelini. I hope we get them all on at some point.
You know, for the listeners, Dan hangs out with Tress like daily, so it was no big deal to him, but it was a big deal to the rest of us. Go ahead, Dan.
No, that's not true. But I think it was just, you know, to hear him tell those things and to be open to the four of us and spend the time. And I think, you know, Kurt mentioned, as Kyle told the story, and you did too, Sal, that there was so much to see in 15 years as to, you know, the stories of why it wasn't just Tim Johnson, that Kwanzaa Swan said, I'll move outside because this guy's so good to be the inside guy. And there were guys that I know he made fun of me that I was calling people for money, but that's what he told me to do. So he had a guy who was a senior his first year, and for spring ball, he needed to do an internship. And I mean, Tress had just met the guy 3 months earlier and said, you got to do that internship. If you miss some practices, we'll make it work. And I'm paraphrasing this. Well, this guy went on, played his senior year, and got into his own business. And fast forward 30 years down the road, and he became basically a very, very generous donor to YSU, like very. And he said, I knew the guy for literally 8 months. I met him in January and was done playing with him. Well, more than 8 months, 10 months, whatever it be. And fast forward 30 plus years later, and he gives back because of what Jim Tressel allowed him to do, an internship that turned into his career that became big. So, and I think we'll want to hear those stories from Coach Haycock and Coach Wolford. I mean, I hope we get them all on, and Coach Pelini. But yeah, I mean, Tress, come on. I mean, what the guy did here in, what was it, 23 total years, 15 years as the coach and 8 as the president. I don't know if there's anybody, if there's been a mayor or a politician or whoever the heck you want to name that has had more influence on our town, not just the university, but the entire region. I mean, they'll have to put 2 statues up of the guy. One is the coach and one is the president. You know, I mean,
Right.
who has done that much? And you know, nobody. So it was great having them on. So.
I guess the point you're talking about, the donor, Dan, what was crazy is I've coached with Haycock. Well, let me say that I've hung out with Tressel now like 4 or 5 times. I'm counting the podcast being one of those times. I coached under Haycock. I coached under Wolf. Don Delisio with the Kansas City Chiefs was on the team. You know, I'm close with all those guys. I feel more comfortable picking up the phone right now and calling Jim Tressel and just shooting the shit with them and just talking to him. I feel more comfortable calling him than any of those guys, and not to say anything bad about any of those guys I mentioned, but that's just the type of person Trussell is. He's that guy. You feel like
Sal,
you can reach
remember,
out and talk to him.
He wants you to meet the coach at USF who
Alex,
was Alex Golish, Coach Golish. He wants you to spend. He just said, "Oh, Coach Golish, there's a guy, a Tampa guy. He's like a Youngstown guy. His family, and he reached out to you to do that. Just kind of, And I think, look, I don't want to lose sight of the other guys we all know. I mean, Coach Haycock. Those years he won the Gateway back to back and went all the way to the Final Four and lost to an Appy State team that beat Michigan. Yeah. Remember, later they went and beat Michigan at the Big House. And I thought Coach Wolford, just behind the scenes, he really developed some relationships with some people that were donors to our program while you guys were there. Yeah. That nobody had developed those I shouldn't say nobody, but he maybe re-engaged those relationships and did some really incredible things. And Bo took us to a national championship. Think about these coaches we've had, these guys that we talk about, and Coach Phillips got us back in the playoffs. I mean, we're really
we've definitely raised the program internally to a
1,000%
level.
1,000%, man. Those guys that played in the 2016 national championship were, call it the way it was. Who recruited the majority of those guys, right? So, but I hope our listeners enjoyed that 2 hours because that was pretty freaking incredible, man.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap it up. Did anyone have any more to say about the season or anything on the topic before we shut it down? All right.
Hope I'm wrong.
Again, if you look to give us a 5-star review, do not give us a review or give us stars based on our predictions. Please take it with a grain of salt, especially if you're one of the players listening to the podcast. We'll just have to see as things shake out. And yes, we're allowed to change our mind as we see the product on the field. But again, we are going to be recording every Wednesday going through the season. So we'll be back next Wednesday at 7:30 on YouTube Live. Please follow us on Instagram, Whitetown Penguin Podcast. Follow us anywhere podcasts are available. Subscribe, give us a 5-star review. We greatly appreciate it. Share it with a friend. But again, this is the Youngstown Penguin Football Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Sal Guerrero. That's Kyle Searle. That's Kurt Hess. That's Dan Kopp. And as always, go Penguins.